Hello and welcome to another episode of CX Behind the Scenes, where we dive into the real world stories, challenges, breakthroughs, all those things that shape the practice of customer experience. I am Carl Charisse, your host, as always, and I'm glad you're with us today for our sixth episode of 2025. Imagine that, the sixth one. Wow. In this third season, we call this Conversations That Matter. And whether you've been with us from the start, or if you're just tuning in for the first time, I'm grateful to have you here to be part of this dynamic and growing community. And if you're curious about what we've covered in past events or want to revisit any of the previous episodes, you can find them all archived on QuestionPro at questionpro.com. So a little bit about me for those new to the show. I lead Horizon CX, which is a customer experience training consultancy that helps organizations build and sustain effective CX strategies. And over the last 20 plus years, I've trained hundreds of professionals through the CX Pro certification program, which is a live instructor-led experiential course designed to give CX newcomers or people fairly new to the profession a solid foundation for their success. And that course is complemented by two books that I have released over the past 2 years. One is called CX Pro, a practical guide for the new customer experience manager. And the other one is called CX Pro Beyond the Basics, Advanced Insights for Customer Experience Professionals. And that book features insights from 16 seasoned experts, including a chapter, I might say, by today's guest speaker. He's shaking his head. Yes, he remembers that.
I do.
So far, 180 plus professionals have earned that CX Pro certification, many of whom have then gone on to pursue the globally recognized CCXP credential that's offered by the Customer Experience Professionals Association. Most recently, I introduced a brand new course called Effective Customer Communications. And that course zeroes in on one of the most vital CX skills, at least in my estimation. That is how to communicate with customers in clear, human, and impactful ways. Because the heart of any CX strategy lies in the quality of our conversations. And anyone interested in learning more about either of those programs, I invite you to visit horizoncx.com. Here on Behind the Scenes, or CX Behind the Scenes, we cut through theory and try to shine a light on what CX really looks like in practice through honest dialogue with leaders, innovators, professionals that are on the front lines. So feel free to jump in, share your thoughts in the chat, ask questions, help shape today's discussions, because after all, the best conversations are the ones we build together. So with that, I'd like to stop for a moment here and have Raj Sivasubramanian. Did I pronounce that right? Because I got it right.
That's all right. You got it.
Yep. I want to let Raj tell us a little bit about Question Pro for those who may not know.
Thanks, Carl. And thanks for having me here. And yes, this is a great show, and I'm always happy to join when I can. You got a lot of great guests. So Question Pro, we are a customer experience solutions provider. We support our clients in across their end-to-end journey, from developing a customer experience strategy, to figuring out what the right listening posts are to capture feedback from customers, to a variety of analytics tools, and then finally to socialize customer feedback and take action on improving the customer experience. Right. So our philosophy at Question Pro when it comes to customer experience is you need to understand your journeys and then take action. Right. So it's important for us when we work with our clients to make sure that they understand their end-to-end customer journey. So that starts with our journey management platform that allows clients of ours to visualize and showcase the customer journey, but then that connects into the broader CX suite that we have, and we look at our survey platform or our analytics platform. They integrate directly with the journey management platform, so it allows you to understand in real time where the key pain points, the key moments that matter for your customers, and then all of that connects in with some of our closed loop tracking tools that allow our clients to follow up with customers, but then also take customer insights to drive organizational changes, right? So feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or want to know more about Question Pro, but we're a big supporter of Carl and what he's doing and the top-notch guests that he brings on.
Thanks, Raj. We got it all covered, don't we? We got the technology covered. We got the learning behind it. It's all covered here with Question Pro.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we dive into the discussion today, we usually like to kick things off like we always do with a quick poll question to warm things up. And today we're talking about kindness, and not those grand sweeping gestures, but the everyday, often overlooked moments that can quickly and quietly shape a customer's experience. Think of it as random acts of CX. We all like to believe our organizations are kind at heart, and the question is, how intentional are we about it? Do we celebrate those small human moments, or are they simply happy accidents? So let's take a second to see where our organization lands when it comes to encouraging kindness in customer interactions. So we got the poll up there, and so I'm going to use my handy cell phone here to scan that QR code, because I like to do that poll on my phone. And once I'm there, I will sign in. Sign in stranger. There we go. I see 6 participants. We need more than that. Let's go. Okay, so the question is, which of the following best describes your organization's and how it encourages moments of kindness in customer interactions? And the answers are, we have a formal program that celebrates and shares positive customer stories. Acts of kindness happen, but they're not widely recognized. We rely on individual employee values, but there's no structured support. We're exploring ways to bring more humanity to our CX strategy, or honestly, kindness isn't something we've talked about yet. Wow, that's interesting. Interesting. So 66% of those said they have formal programs that celebrate and share positive stories. I'm encouraged by that. I don't know about you, David, but I'm encouraged by that answer.
Anything that's a positive can be encouraging in situations in which people feel like they need good news.
Well said.
Thank you.
I'm pleased to welcome back, I should say, to CXPS. This is your second time here.
Yeah.
And I've known you and respected you for many years. From Bentley University, Gary and I first connected through the Boston CXPA network, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And I've had the honor of being a guest on his podcast, Experience by Design, and I'm thrilled to have it back with us today on CX Behind the Scenes. So
thanks for having
Gary
me.
is a professor of sociology and experience design at Bentley, where he's been teaching since 1999. Did I get that year right? 1999.
Yep.
He earned his doctorate in sociology from Wayne State, and his early research focused on intergroup dynamics in immigrant-owned convenience stores. We might get into a little of that. Since then, his work has expanded to include everything from distributed software teams and police interrogations to digital psychiatry and patient experience. Boy, that's a broad spectrum there, Gary. As a certified clinical sociologist, Gary brings a unique lens to the field, applying deep sociological insights to real-world challenges in customer, employee, user, patient experience. He also consults with organizations on designing training programs and integrating digital tools into human-centered practices. And as I said before, he also co-hosts the Experience by Design podcast that delves into how both digital and personal experiences can be intentionally shaped to build trust, connection, and meaning. Gary brings a rare and valuable perspective that blends academic insight with practical impact. Gary, welcome back to the show. Did I cover everything? Do you do more things than I mentioned?
Yeah, there's a YouTube channel. Don't worry about it, though.
Now, you must do something for fun and relaxation. I'll always like to know what you do when you're not doing this professorship.
Just this, Carl. This is what I consider fun and relaxing, talking with you.
I think I see you do a lot of hiking. I think I see you on social media doing lots of hiking.
Nah, more running and cross-country skiing when time affords and allows, but
okay.
tough to fit it in sometimes.
But it's outdoorsy stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
So let's start here. We, there's this big idea called movement of kindness, and so I want to ask you, how do you position that within the context of customer experience? And you mentioned that book written by Greg Sattel, and he calls this thing a cascade. So you can say a little bit more about that and bring us up to a level of understanding here what we're talking about today.
When I first started becoming aware that there was a field called CX, I was looking at, what is this thing? And I was looking at the CCXP exam and the pillars or the foundational concepts or areas of CX. And talking with people like yourselves who are in CX. And one of the things that really struck my attention was this notion of cultural change. We need to change the culture of an organization so that it's more customer centric. And that struck my attention because sociologists study social change, right? I mean, we study cultural change. It's social movements, collective behavior is one of the things that sociology is premised on, is trying to understand what leads to change occurring. What are the precipitating factors, or what are the conditions that lead to change? So I became very interested in exploring more about this and, thinking about it, theorizing about how might we apply concepts from sociology around social change, collective behavior, social movements into a CX context. And that's what I was thinking about, especially around Sattel and other work, trying to link those two together, because quite frankly, in what I've seen, there's not a lot of that linkage taking place between that academic literature and a professional application like in CX. Most of the academic literature is focused on larger social movements, right? Understandably so. Not so much changing culture or creating social movements within organizations.
It's interesting. I might be repeating myself here, but back in the 80s, I worked for a company that was founded based on a culture, not founded based on a technology or what we're going to build, what we're going to offer, but a culture. Because they are the 6 founding members came from a traditional organization, and they had basically got fed up with the way traditional organizations ran. So they founded an organization based on a culture first. To the point when I joined the organization, I was probably the 50th or 60th employee. My first interview was, because I had a chemistry background, was, do you understand the technology that we're probably going to, deal with here? Sure. And the other 5 interviews were, am I a cultural fit for that organization? And I can tell you more stories about that, but I mean, there was certain ways of life within that organization that were established up front. And it lasted. I mean, sustainability, is an issue for anything when you try to make a cultural change. Or this wasn't a cultural change. This was a cultural initiation. I would venture to say that if you have an organization that already has an established culture, changing that is the harder of the two, rather than establishing one from the very get-go.
Yeah, and when cultural change happens in situations like that, usually it's around shifting from a startup modality into more of a mature organization modality, where, if like you, or you've talked to other people or people who are listening right now, might have had the experience where as a startup, there was a certain kind of culture created through the relationships, through the practices. Maybe little was written down in terms of formal processes, but the informal, as we would say sociologically, norms, expectations of behavior were so strong and powerful that they established a sense of how we should act. What should we do? Right. What does it mean to be who we are? Then when things scale, people are recruited, things get bigger, things become more formal. It's interesting because there can be a dilution of that. Okay. Where even though we formalize things, we can start to feel more removed from those norms, from that identity, because we're bringing in people who haven't been socialized in that original culture.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because it's true. I mean, the culture was formed, and I think being an early employee of the company, I witnessed that firsthand. And their mantra was do the right thing. You think about that. I mean, imagine you're a brand new employee and you're told to do the right thing.
Right.
What do you do? Well, you start observing around to see what other people are doing. And that carried over into the world of customers as well. So, you were, as an employee of the company, especially if you were customer facing, you had to make decisions often, to do the right thing for the customer.
Right.
And doing the wrong thing was never frowned upon, except if you didn't learn from it. If you did something that wasn't the right thing, but you learned from it, that was basically doing the right thing.
It's interesting. I was recently able to be a judge for the U.S. Customer Experience Awards, and the category in which I was involved was best customer service. Okay, and one of the groups that, this goes to your point, one of the groups that was presenting was Hendrick Automotive, and one of the things that they were talking about is enabling workers to make decisions in gray areas regarding coverage, automotive coverage. That if it's gray, you make the decision and we'll support you, and encourage to make the decision in favor of the customer. And so, I mean, this morning, as I was kind of getting my thoughts together for today, I wrote basically a 3,000 page document. It's probably going to grow a little bit on this, empowering employees to do the right thing. And also asking the question, as a CX professional or anybody, are there things that exist in our organization that prevent that from happening? And that's an important question to ask. What is it? And I've seen this in organizations, that shall remain nameless, but this is not a unique story. When people follow policies and processes, does that work in favor of the organization or the customer? And is it used as a fallback to essentially give up agency by the employee to say, I'm just following the rules, I'm just following policy?
Who was it that said, it was Tom Peters, I think years ago, in one of his rants, of course, or presentation, said the policy manual is the thing that comes out when you want to hang somebody.
One of my favorite, I would love to collect a lot of examples of these because I find them so infuriating, is when people say, but the computer says. What the computer says is just such a interesting way of handling an interaction that takes away authority and agency from the employee. And also, by the way, establishes a very strong us and them orientation. Us company, you customers, right? And when you establish an us and them orientation and interaction, things don't tend to go really well after that. So you can see the social distance emerge when people start to use these kinds of crutches of, but the computer says, the policy is, this is what we do, right? As a way of not doing the right thing.
It's interesting. You triggered a thought in my mind. This is going back some years ago. I needed a short-term loan, a very small loan, $1,000 loan. So I called, I don't know who the bank was, the institution, and I talked to this young person who was trying to help me. And I want to borrow $1,000 and pay back over a year, right? And she did some calculations with her computer and said that the monthly payment would be $685 and some cents. And I'm like,
that seems high.
Excuse me. I said, I'm borrowing $1,000.
Was this the mob? Were you borrowing from some loan shark in Salisbury? Salisbury in the North Shore.
It was a legitimate financial institution.
Okay.
So when I said that can't be, I got that answer back. But that's what the computer is telling me.
Right.
And so this person would not go beyond what the computer was telling it. What logic did not make a difference in her mind. This was what the computer said. So,
And that probably came from someplace, right? I mean, it's interesting, and I don't know, maybe I'm pontificating here, and this is not rooted in quote unquote the data other than my own experiences and the experiences people have shared with me. But organizations often can get in the way of people acting like human beings. This is my general assessment, right? And it's like, okay, because we're not acting as human beings, we're acting as in roles, right? And that's a customer. I'm an employee, whatever my title is. I am performing a role that I've been taught this role entails. And as a result of this, I'm going to act in this kind of manner. All right. Well, if we can put the humanness back into the role as a foundational piece, does that get us closer to treating people well in acts of kindness that might have to do? I've seen situations, as you have, as people listening have, where you can deny somebody what they called in for, what they were asking for in terms of remedy, and it go well. And so it's not just fulfilling, I want to return this, or I want a refund, or whatever it is, right? It can go well without fulfilling what the original ask was, if that element of kindness, humanness is included in that interaction.
I have a perfect example of that. And in fact, for some odd reason, I was thinking about it during my walk this morning. I walk early in the morning. I got 13,000 steps so far today, and that's not done. But I was thinking about this. This goes back to 1919. See, now you know how old I am. I'm in the 1900s. It goes back to 1971. I was in the Air Force, and I landed in California. And I was driving a car in LA, and I blocked an intersection. No, no, no in LA. Blocking an intersection. So the policeman was right there to stop me, pulled me over. Very well-spoken, nice gentleman, said, "Sorry, sir, you're not supposed to block that intersection. So I'm going to give you two options." I'm like, oh my, I'm going to get options here. You can either pay the fine, which is $100, or I can offer you for less of a fine, $50, a traffic course that you can take on a Saturday. And of course, I'm like, okay, I'll take the lesser of the two charges here, and I'll sign up for the course. And I have to tell you, that was one of the best courses I'd ever gone to. Was held at a hotel, usually in a conference room. So it felt like a conference, felt like a CX conference. And there were several officers there, instructions, videos, the whole bit. And they went from 9 to 3. I'm sorry, 9 to 4. From 9 to noon, you had, lessons and things that were pertain to driving in the state of California. And at noontime, you had lunch. And when I mean lunch, it was like a 5-star dinner. It was memorable, a memorable dinner. I mean, it was not just sandwiches and a bag of chips. We're talking a really hot, like an evening meal. And then 3 hours in the afternoon and a certificate at the end. I'm like, hey, I want to block more intersections.
Right. Don't let word get out.
The $50 was probably one of the best meals I had in California the time I lived there. But I mean, to me, that is taking a bad situation, right? And I don't know. I mean, they were progressive. They probably are somewhat today, maybe less so. I don't know, because progressive ideas are not, looked upon kindly in many areas. But I don't know if they do that today, but that was a surprise for me. And I think that's what you get is when you have something happen like that, it's the element of surprise. It's like, nobody likes to get stopped, and get a ticket or anything, but that was one of the best outcomes I ever experienced, getting a ticket.
Yeah. And part of this, the formulation I'm kind of working with here, is at a deeper level rethinking the approach to organizational change in any kind of experience design, but especially in CX, because very often when I talk to CX professionals, they talk about trying to get buy-in from the leadership to embrace some kind of program so that resources are dedicated to it to help spread the word throughout the organization. So you get this kind of top-down model. Well, that is one way of social change, but other theories and approaches to social change is more of might be considered bottom up, which is, well, people are doing things already that are demonstrating the change they would like to see. And then it becomes the role of somebody in a leadership position to coalesce that together, to connect those pieces and those dots. And when you kind of look at, there's all kinds of examples of social movements that are attributed to an individual or to an event. But when you dig deeper into those movements, it started way before. It was already happening by virtue of the behaviors, the actions, the activities of folks who were seeing a new kind of world that was desirable and trying to act in a way to bring that about. And so rather than trying to think about it as a top down, thinking about it somewhat more as a bottom up, but really, and this is, I think, one of the things I'm wrestling with here, where CX comes in, a middle out. And this is where, Greg Cassells comes in, or Sattel comes in. It's this notion of how does a CX professional acting as a almost organizer start to connect these moments that already exist in an organization in a way that establishes this groundswell of momentum to create change and to make it more scalable and realize it within an organization.
So that leads me to a question here that I had prepared in advance here. So in a world that's driven by metrics, KPIs, net promoters, how can CX leaders make space for recognizing and valuing these small intangible moments? And they don't show up on a dashboard.
That's because, if folks would get the book you mentioned and read my chapter, see what I did there?
Yes, thank you very much. And they should
You're
buy
welcome.
that. Yeah,
they should buy and read my chapter. There's a lot of great chapters.
I should put a link in the chat.
So data is anything that tells you more about something you're interested in exploring. And the inherent in conversations around data and metrics is this idea that everything needs to be quantified. And that's not true. Okay. And if you look at my chapter and you look at this data and research inventory that I, encourage people to perform, we can look at these small moments. Those can be captured, not just especially now with speech analytics, but those can be captured in a variety of ways by going to those who are closer to the event. What do I mean by that? It's creating this chain of information that exists from the contact center or those who are on, direct, interaction with customers, for instance, into who they report to, into who they report to, et cetera. And it's being able to draw those tidbits together and then organize them into a way that establishes it as a kind of movement, as a thing that we do, that already exists and that we need to embrace and scale throughout the organization.
Thinking of, contact centers, and, I've had experiences where I've called in for whatever reason. Was it a complaint or a question or a problem I'm trying to resolve, But I feel like, it's all scripted, and when I feel like I'm being scripted, that's, you're not being human to me. So I guess, what role does frontline play in this, creating these movements or micro movements, and how can leaders encourage that without relying on these scripts and checklists and all this?
Well, yeah, I think part of it is, getting rid of the scripts, and creating, you have to treat your people like they're competent. And some of that, think about this. When do we learn how to speak? Pretty early on for most of us, right? And so you're taking something that people should have some competence in doing, having some conversational competence, and then saying, we don't trust you in something you've been doing for a very long time now. And so we need to tell you what to say. I mean, there's nothing wrong with creating some set of expectations, some guardrails around what we expect you to do. But within those guardrails, providing, from an employee experience perspective, providing some leeway for people to improvise, to bring their authentic self, to have some agency in terms of determining what they say. There's two things that come to mind that are examples of this. One is some research that was done by friends of mine when they were at the Palo Alto Research Center, when it was Xerox Palo Park. And they looked at contact communications with people who were using expert systems to help with repairs or troubleshoot, copy machines, and those who were trained, repair people. Okay. And it was interesting because the trained repair people would not even follow the script necessarily. And they would use their own expertise to create these real moments that were far more effective at helping deduce the problem and arriving at a solution. And so in the videos and, that they collected of these interactions, and this goes back, probably 20 or 30 years, you can see these moments emerge, right? Where it was personal, it was real, it was connected, and that the outcomes were generally positive versus a tightly scripted one. And just as another point, I was doing a consulting project with a company, and to redesign their contact center training. First thing I did was listen to a bunch of calls. And there was one call in particular that broke almost every rule that they had laid out, and it was probably the best call.
Yeah, imagine that.
Because it went on long, it was kind of rambling a little, there was pauses, but when I asked the leadership to give me their evaluation of it, positive or negative, they were uniformly positive. So think about the extent to which your requirements, your policies, procedures, rules are interfering with people's abilities to connect.
Yeah, I think policies and rules are sometimes just taken literally verbatim, without putting here's an example. I currently live, because I am moving, I currently live in a condominium, a small condominium, and we're trying to establish an agreed upon set of rules and regulations. There were some done back in 2015 that were outdated. And it's hard to come to consensus on this thing here. And, one happened to be about the use of barbecue grills on decks and how close proximity to the house and stuff like that. It's just amazing how, but the thing is, could we come to a statement of just humanistic discussion around, when you're using a barbecue grill, consider where you're using it and how you're using it, and, going back to do the right thing without getting this thing to look like a policy manual, if you will, for a new owner coming in, or if they decide to lease their unit, the new lessees coming in there, understand what the guidelines are, rather than this strict policy, like going back to that comment, the policy manual comes up when we want to burn somebody, we want to fire somebody, want to hang somebody.
There's a larger conversation here that we don't have to get into, but it's an interesting one that centers around philosophy, sociology, on, can you write a rule that people can follow with prescribing every contingency that might come up? And there's been a notion that's come up in the news recently around malicious compliance. I can follow a rule, right, and I can be disruptive because I follow the rule. Sometimes It might be called work to rule, in people who can't go on strike, nevertheless slowing down work because they're following rules. And so we can't think that behaviors are dictated by rules. Far more of our everyday lives are dictated by norms and expectations that are contextual. And so part of what I'm saying here about this moments of kindness and movements of experience is the CX, professional's job being not just trying to convince leadership, but doing the work of connecting what already exists and establishing that as a norm that people are already participating in, and then attracting more people to that. There's a great quote from Greg Sattel that that I was reading as kind of going through this morning, and it had something to do with, building a movement through attraction, right? That by attracting people to it, by this outward expansion and attraction, you can create a much more stable movement because people are buying into it more.
I have a perfect example of that. When I joined this company that was built on culture, one of the first things I noticed when I walked into the building was employees walking through the hallway, if they saw something on the carpet that wasn't supposed to be there, i.e. a piece of paper, a paper clip or whatever, would pick it up and take care of it. And I noticed this all the time. So I was attracted to that moment of, and then the movement was, that's what people do here. This is what this culture is all about. It isn't waiting for, mom doesn't work here. So, and they don't have a cleaning crew or a startup organization. People take care of things. And that's how that began. So that's a moment. I was going to try to tie moments to movements because this is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There's a moment that turned into a movement, and that became the way of existence in that building.
Yeah, and it wasn't part of any kind of onboarding.
No,
Pick a paper.
it wasn't, and it wasn't in a policy manual or anything like that. So
no, and it's just who you are, right? It's who we are. It's what it means to be here and to be one of us. And this becomes, again, from a sociological standpoint, a very powerful force. That when people, as human beings, we typically seek to belong. We want to belong. We're social animals. And so when you lay out the requirements of belonging in these kinds of behaviors that can't be clearly articulated in a policy manual, and if they were, no one would read it, they start to influence behaviors in a very organic way. And that's really what I'm trying to talk about here, is this kind of thinking about how CX professionals are essentially activists of sort, not in a political sense, but maybe in a political sense when it comes to organizations, right? I'm not talking about politics on the national scale. I'm talking about within the organization, actively encouraging certain kinds of behaviors to fulfill a vision of customer centricity.
And again, going back to, kind of do the right thing as a kind of philosophy, do the right thing and learn from, even if you make a mistake, and learn from that cultural aspect of internal behavior turned outward to the customer in the customer behaviors.
Right.
So, my role at that time was as a training director to customers. All of those internal behaviors became behaviors exhibited to customers. And well, I'll tell you, got a lot of good feedback about that.
Yeah. And, I prefer to think of things rather than telling people what not to do, tell them what they can do. And when I've, teach courses in DEI, was one of the people who started the DEI major at Bentley University. And one of the things that's powerful in those kinds of conversations is, and which I think actually in a lot of ways DEI programs in the contemporary sense often miss, is this idea of, we were talking about micro affirmations.
Right.
What's a micro affirmation? Well, simply, it's just a way of exhibiting a positive behavior towards somebody that might be marginalized or oppressed or at risk or things like that. And that might be as simple as a smile. So it goes back to this question of, well, how do you put that on a dashboard? Like, I don't know that you do. I mean, I guess technically speaking, you could have AI or something looking at video footage and trying to figure out how many smiles are held. But, that's kind of overcomplicating things to a certain extent. It's trying to imbue people with a vision of what we're trying to achieve and, reinforcing that with demonstrations that we're already doing it. So we're not creating it out of whole cloth. These are things that we already are taking place. And by the way, these are things that people know how to do, but it's just that when they get into a structured environment where they take on a particular role that feels disconnected from that, they're less likely to demonstrate it.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know how this works as an example, but I shop at Market Basket.
Yeah, me too.
And I do a lot of observing of people and behaviors at Market Basket. And I must say that there are a contingent of folks who, when they enter the store, they get their cart and they're like hell bent for leather for whatever they want to do. And they will push the carts through you, around you with a disgusting look until they get to the checkout. And while they're at the checkout, they're on their phone trying to have a conversation with somebody at work or a spouse that they're arguing, trying to check out. Anyway, my whole demeanor when I go to the market, my wife and I tend to do this. Everybody in Market Basket has a name tag. So you know their first name and last name, and it tells you how many years they've worked there. We always at the checkout address those people by their name. Nothing works better than having a person called themselves called by name. It's just an affirmation that you exist over here. So I use that as an example because it's very simple. Think of it. Next time you go to the supermarket, just consciously use the person's name, and you'll be surprised. You'll get so many smiles back out of that.
And real quick, I know there's some questions in chat.
Yeah.
When I was doing my liquor store research in Detroit, and these are Arab-owned liquor stores and grocery stores in Detroit. Detroit being primarily at the time African American. Most of the liquor stores and grocery stores were owned by people from the Arab world.
Yep.
It was in the 1990s, and one would expect in the aftermath of the Rodney King verdict and all of this tension and strife and what happened in Koreatown or Korean stores in LA that there'd be a lot of antagonism and a lot of conflict in these stores. And most of the time it was just really boring, being in the stores. People would come in, buy something and leave. But what I was struck by was the extent to which small conversation, small talk led to the formation of close relationships. So small things leading to, scalable outcomes. And it's those small moments that matter. That's why small talk is so important, but yet under-researched. It's by being able to engage in these moments that can create a broader relationship and movement.
Well, thank you. Let's go to some of the questions that I see up here. Joyce has a question. Says, how can you capture and measure kindness and trust?
Thanks, Joyce. It just, it depends on, there's a lot of ways, right? I mean, if I think about, the matrix that I created, that's in Carl's book, there's another plug for Carl's book.
Thank you. You
can think about it from a quantitative close-ended way or from a qualitative descriptive way, right? If I have phone calls in my contact center, I can listen to the phone calls and I can do a qualitative analysis of that to identify things that I might characterize as these moments, right, that matter, so to speak, these moments of kindness, these moments of connection. And then also interview the workers in the call center. If I have access to the customer, I could do a follow-up interview with that customer. We can do surveys, as well. We can program algorithms for speech analytics software to try to identify certain tags or certain features of these moments to try to capture and then analyze. So there's a lot of ways we might do it. Self-reporting, mystery shopping, diary studies. So there's any number of ways we could do it. It just depends on, the scale and the resources we have, the scale we want to get to, and the analytical might, who we have to do the analysis. But there are all kinds of ways of approaching this that would help to identify them, encapsulate them, and use them to guide further behavior.
Well, Joyce, thank you for asking that question. I hope that helps bring an answer to that.
I will give my email at the end of this. Happy to chat further if you want to dig into that and just, have a conversation about it.
All right, great. Yeah. Someone also called Bright asked the question, how to handle difficult and annoying customers. Ooh.
Yeah, I mean that's a big description. And I used to work in restaurants, so I do good. I used to wait tables, used to bus tables, used to do all the things. And I guess one of the things that I always like to think about that I would teach my folks, and I did it when I was doing a training for this one company, is what's called the Q-tip principle. Quit taking it personally. Right?
Oh, that's a cool one.
Yeah, Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. I can't control you. All I can control is my reaction to you. That's my choice. And so I don't know what's going on in this person's life. I don't know what kind of day they had. I don't know what kind of trauma they had in the past. I mean, all these things. So rather than making it about me, it's more about them. And so that's one of the things I tried to talk with folks about. And one of the other devices I used in this training was using a book called Verbal Judo, which is written by he was written by a former professor of English that then became a police officer, of how to handle difficult conversations. And it's a fascinating book about how to essentially redirect the energy that's negative in these interactions so that you can preserve not escalate, and maybe, increase the peace in that moment. So those were the approaches I was taking, is depersonalize it, and then also have strategies of deflecting it as well.
So as a customer in a restaurant once, I had a difficulty with a meal and how it was cooked. And the wait person actually looked me in the eye and said, "Sir, you're not listening to me."
No, well, there you go.
Not quite what I wanted to hear.
No, I mean, I'm interested. This is why I study police interrogations, how interactions take place in contentious environments and how people use conversational resources to mitigate that, contextual tension. Arab-owned liquor stores, police interrogations, contact centers. So I've always kind of been interested in those places where things should be hot, and how people are able to cool it down interactionally.
Looks like there's Wesley Grossmark as a question. I don't know if the question is there, Paulina, or does Wesley want to? Oh, there it is. How do you navigate customer patient HCP services when representing a highly regulated industry that has legal compliance restraints?
Great question. I actually have an answer. So if you go to Experience by Design podcast and you look for the episode, I'll pull it up here in a second, the number, with Dr. Justin Bright, who was an emergency room physician. No, he wasn't an emergency room, but he was involved in the patient experience initiative at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. And we talked about this. And one of the things that he said during the podcast interview was, because healthcare is so tightly constrained in terms of regulation, the only space he has for improvisation is the interaction he has with his patients. And so one of the things he talked about is experimenting with different kinds of approaches in the conversation to create better connection and a relationship in the moment to help him perform his clinical duties. And so that's one of the things that I saw with, clinical encounters with doctors, is how do I facilitate relationship through my ability to customize the interactional approach and strategy that I'm using.
There's I think we got another audience question in advance here, and I'll ask this one here. And this one goes along the lines of, I love the idea of micro affirmations, but how do we ensure that they don't become perfunctory? In other words, how do we keep them genuine rather than transactional?
I mean, it's a good question. On one level, we might ask whether or not it matters if someone is acting in a way that's nice to me. Do I know their motivation for it? Do they want something from me? Are they doing it because it's genuine? That's one point. Another point, and this is this piece that I'm writing up this morning, I start to think about one of the problems with the service economy, the way we're conceptualizing it, is that we think about service as something that we are essentially providing for someone, not doing for someone. And the difference there is this: providing a service implies a transactional relationships that's rooted in some kind of contract, explicit or implicit. The bathrooms for customers only. This parking's for customers only. The tables are for customers only. So being a customer affords you certain kinds of access to a company's goods and services and resources.
Yeah.
Doing a service for somebody is not transactional. It's more relational, in a sense of, I'm doing this for you, not because I have to, but because I want to. And the idea of doing service for someone is a really powerful notion, because this is why in recovery programs, service is a fundamental thing that people have to immediately start doing service for others, because it gets you out of your own head, and it also gets you into the space of seeing how you can contribute positively to other people's lives, that you have value to contribute. And so, rather than thinking about the service economy as, providing a service, think about the service economy as doing a service.
Wouldn't it be revolutionary if governments thought that way?
It would be revolutionary if we all thought that way. I mean, there's a book I was looking at yesterday, called Building a Culture of Good. And that's like the very notion of it, is like, how do we create organizations? Or another book I was looking at called The Purpose Economy, or Firms of Endearment. And there's works out there that, rather than conceptualizing the business as, providing a service, think about the business as doing a service. One of the guests that I talked to yesterday, it's going to be on the podcast coming up, he just created a company to demonstrate that doing good is a possibility using AI in a company context. That's the very foundation of the company that he founded. And so, there is opportunity to do this. I think that, number one, it is profitable. There's enough research being done that shows the profitability of this approach. And number two, it helps to service the larger stakeholder ecosystem. And number three, it's a good thing to do, right? I mean, people don't like to think about that as being something related to business, but I mean, at least at the school I teach, which is the Business University, we talk about business for good all the time.
Jerry has got a question. So, Jerry, are you there, or is your awesome work, Dr. Gary? Question for a concept that is core to human nature: why do corporations find it so hard to lead with kindness?
Yeah, hey Jerry, what's going on? Yeah, it's a larger question that we could talk a lot about, but a simple answer would be that for a long time culturally, and this I think goes to different national conceptualizations of corporations, that culturally we think about business and doing good as separate from each other, right? That they're completely separate. And so to do good would therefore be to, lessen the business approach that we have, or the business efficacy that we have, rather than seeing them as part and parcel of each other. I teach a course on employee experience in our MBA program. And, one of the key things we talk about is doing good for people is doing good for business, right? Is like this notion, this fundamental notion that they aren't mutually exclusive. If you see them as mutually exclusive, you're not gonna listen to anything I'm saying right now, and you're not gonna act in this way, and that's fine. But what we're seeing is that companies that do act in that way are as or more competitive than those that don't, because they build employee ambassadorship, they build customer ambassadorship, they build a strength of connection that helps them when they need help.
We're getting close to the hour here, but I want to ask you maybe a couple more questions.
Sure.
What advice would you give to someone in a CX role who's trying to spark that movement of kindness, but feels like they're the only one pushing that rock uphill?
Well, and that's the thing I want to emphasize here, right? They're not, because I would imagine, I mean, maybe they are, depending on the organization, how bad it is, but they're probably not. Okay. And that's the point. It's to build these coalitions. Look, it can be very disempowering to feel like you're the only one. And we know this when we look historically at moments of significant social change in which the changes that are occurring aren't very positive, and people feel like they don't have any kind of agency to do anything about it. One of the key elements is to connect with others who are like-minded in their orientation and their belief and their actions, so that you don't feel alone, so that you don't feel isolated. And then to start, and going back to Greg Sattel, start to scale those connections by building those integrations and those networks. Because once you start to build that, you feel less alone, and you start to get a sense of momentum that can be articulated as something that is happening, whether leadership wants it or not.
Yeah, I think in some instances, if you're the lone person in the CX role, you might feel that way, as opposed to if you had a team, or if you had an organization that, at least from the senior leadership perspective, was kind of bought into the idea of customer experience is an important part of our strategy.
And this is why I would, rather than thinking just about going up, I would think about going down and out. To find those allies, to find those people that are support the vision, or they might not even be acting on a vision. This is just who they are.
Yep. No, in fact, I can tell you, because I lived through that when I worked in corporate. I found my message was broadly across the organization and down in the organization versus up. I mean, up was, they had their own ideas and thoughts and foci and stuff like that. But everybody from front line up to middle management was where my sweet spot was. I had no problem with them. So let's ask a final question here. If we were to fast forward 5 years from now, what would it look like if organizations embraced and acted on this concept of movements of kindness in their customer experience programs?
Well, I would think, as a more fundamental step, having programs to train CX professionals in this kind of, and this is what something I've been talking about quite a bit, almost like a community organizing model or a social activist model. Again, I'm not talking about on a national level. I'm talking about an organizational level of what are the strategies, what are the skills, what are the attributes, what are the approaches used by people who do this role in a social level. How do they do it? And how can we then adopt some of that into the CX role, and then have the CX professionals be able to do that in organizations themselves?
That may be an idea for a future course.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are at the top of the hour, which means that we are officially out of time here, but I want to thank you for being my guest here. Second time appearance. Maybe we'll go for a third at some time, next year. Who knows?
I'm around.
We have a survey. It wouldn't be a Question Pro if we didn't have a survey here. We have a survey related to this episode, which you can use your QR code right there in your phone to answer. And I might also want to let you know that next month we will be having this CXPS episode on Tuesday, July 29th. I will be in my new home base at that time. And my guest then will be Thomas Linton. He's the president of Catapult Solutions, and he'll talk about feedback is a gift. I think I've heard that phrase before. Feedback is a gift, but how do we use that gift? How do we apply it to innovation and growth? So that'll be our topic for next month. Hope to see you back here. Thanks again, Gary, and thanks again, Pauline, in the background. And Jeff Hughes says, great conversation. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you, Jeff. Always nice to hear that feedback. Thank you. Take care, and see you next time.
Bye, everybody.